Let's bring in Anna Bligh now, who heads up the Australian Banking Association. Thanks for joining us again, Anna. I'm pretty keen to get your thoughts on mortgage owners, homeowners seeking these deferrals in their mortgage repayments. That's been generously offered by the banks. I believe more than 300,000 people have done this now.
That's right, Chris, and good afternoon. There's been 320,000 Australians as of last Friday who have had their mortgage payments deferred for 6 months. We're waiting to see the next round of data, but there's been more approvals this week. There's still a lot of people who are in a lot of distress. The great bulk of these started, in that first couple of weeks when the government put on the first round of restrictions. And there were a lot of businesses who have tried really hard to keep going. But as every week goes by, there are some people who are still in employment, but their hours have been reduced so significantly. They were fine 3 weeks ago, but this week and last week they can't make their mortgage payments, and so those applications and inquiries are still pouring in.
There's a bit of a trap here. Sorry to interrupt, Anna. There's a bit of a trap here for the homeowners, isn't there? Because interest will still accumulate on their loans over this period. And so when they get back to employment, hopefully, and back to repaying their mortgage, they'll have a higher bill to repay. And they may even have higher minimum repayments. So it's not something that people should jump into in a cavalier fashion, only if they're really, really desperate.
Chris, I think the advice is always, whatever debt you've got, if you're in a position to pay it, you should pay it as quickly as you can. But in this circumstance, where people have suddenly had either all of their income stripped away because they've lost their job, or they've gone, they're now only getting 10 or 20% of what they were getting 5 weeks ago, they're facing the reality of maybe losing their family home. And so I think, in those circumstances, the choice is clear. You would take the deferral. You are right. I should say there's no...
Couldn't banks go that extra yard and actually not charge interest on those loans during the holiday?
Well, Chris, I think one of the really important things we've seen over the last few weeks is the importance of having a strong and stable and profitable banking system. The only reason banks can offer, this is $6.8 billion worth of repayments that have been deferred. And you've seen the banks in the last 3 weeks, three banks in the last 2 weeks come out with significant profit drops, and they can withstand that. But they need to do all of this carefully and prudentially. So I do need to stress for your listeners, there's no nasty balloon payment at the end of this 6 months. It will be entirely up to the customer whether or not they want to make up that 6 months by making some extra payments over the rest of the loan, or they might want to add a period of time at the end of the loan. The scale of this is without any precedent. This is getting up to 5 and 6% of the mortgage loan book for a lot of banks, and you don't want to come out of a health crisis with any kind of banking crisis, because we need those banks to be strong as we hopefully turbocharge out of this and be ready and able to put credit into the economy where it's needed.
Yeah, just quickly on that, we've seen banks, as you say, come out with profits well down, dividends down, looking to raise capital. Will the banks come out of this pandemic crisis weakened?
I don't believe so. All of the actions they've taken to date have been, done in close consultation with APRA, the prudential regulator. Banks actually went into this, as a result of the GFC. There's been 10 years of learning about the need to build sufficient capital buffers. Australian banks are among the best capitalised in the world now, and they went into this crisis stronger than they have ever been. So they are very well placed to play the role they're playing right now, and that is being the shock absorbers for the Australian economy as it confronts the awful reality of coronavirus. But that means they've got to do things carefully and prudently, but do everything they can to help individual customers, both mums and dads, businesses, as well as be there to put credit into the economy as soon as whenever they can.
Now, Anna Bligh, this story moves so quickly, going back 2-3 months, as as the virus took hold around the world, we reacted in this country and elsewhere with all sorts of measures, including these economic measures and banking measures you're talking about. But we have got ourselves into a very, very good space now with that flat curve, with infections so low around the country. You mentioned before small business, medium-sized businesses now still really feeling the pain. What are you hoping for out of National Cabinet tomorrow? Really, there must be pressure on the Premiers, surely, to loosen the restrictions on business and allow people to start to try and trade their way out of this.
Chris, I'm hoping for what I think most Australians are hoping for, and that's some clarity about what comes next. The National Cabinet is set to consider this. They're talking about giving us a bit of an outline of the road to recovery. As soon as businesses know when they can open, how long they can open for, and then they can really start to plan. At the moment, without knowing which restrictions are going to be lifted first, how long they're going to be able to, how long they'll take to be fully open. Very hard to plan investment, very hard to know exactly the pace at which each sector will come out. So I'm hoping that we'll have some clarity out of tomorrow. I don't think that the Prime Minister and the National Cabinet would be talking about this issue if they didn't have some confidence that they will be able to start the process. I suspect they'll be quite cautious, not a bad thing, but I do think certainty and clarity is what the business sector needs, particularly to start thinking about restocking, getting staff, back on rosters and starting to advertise to their customers about when they can be open.
I'm also worried about urgency, though, because all this happened very suddenly. The pain is dramatic. We've heard from Josh Frydenberg that this is costing the government $4 billion a week. How would you characterise week by week what is happening in business, small and large, to employment, to families, to the future? These are businesses that may not survive this.
Chris, I think I describe it as catastrophic. In addition to the mortgage deferrals that we talked about earlier, we've got almost 200,000 businesses that have now received deferrals on their business loans. There's been $45 billion of new lending from Australia's banks over the last about 2.5 months. Not all of that, but most of it related to COVID impact. A lot of it is money to help businesses get from 3 weeks, 4 weeks ago to this week when they were waiting for the first JobKeeper payment. I think there's a real sense of despair. When I talk to some of the banks, they're telling me that the nature of the calls on their call centres are very different than they were, say this time last year. It's not unusual. I mean, at any period in the economy, some people are going to unfortunately lose their jobs, but the scale of this and the not knowing about what comes next. Bank call centres are telling me about, people literally sobbing on the phone and feeling like they may be at risk of losing everything. And what we need to come out of this is people to have optimism, to be fit, to be looking at what possible innovations they might have learnt about from their business during this period, ready to invest, ready to think about growth. So I think, the sooner we've got clarity, the better that will be.